Okay, this engine, here she's back. Made a change to it. This way I suppose be part 2. Maybe part 2 of 2. We'll see. I made a change, which if you looked at the previous video, which I guess I should link to downstairs, I went from this copper and aluminum power cylinder, aluminum piston, associated connecting rod with flexible, and just a hunk of copper. And this has worked out quite well. And let's see, to get you an idea what this is about. This is just a a silicone rubber sheet as a buffer. And if I let a little air leak out the bottom, this thing drops straight down. Hardly any friction there. If I seal it just by pressing down on it, and drop this, give you an idea. Okay, so that was what was in here as a power piston. It's now been replaced with a glass and graphite power piston. This actually was a damper, a mechanical damper. Well, that's at least what its intended purpose was. Although they work really well for this, and for a couple of reasons, there has been a remarkable improvement in the operation of this engine with this as opposed to this. Couple of differences, fundamental differences are that with this copper tube and piston, the copper came all the way right up to the displacer cylinder, and so did the piston. Piston, I guess you could say top dead center, was right about there, right about like that. And so the volume of air, of gas if you like, contained in the displacer cylinder, and that is a little bit increased because this power piston does not travel as far inward. So that leaves a space, whatever the diameter of that hole is. I've not measured it. I have, I just don't have it handy. But anyway, it added a little bit of space, a little bit of extra volume to the displacer system. But at the same time, the displacement of this power piston is greater because this has a larger inside diameter than this does. The stroke is the same. I have not changed the length of the stroke, trying to keep all other things being equal. Really the only thing that's changed is that the stroke, I'm sorry, the diameter of this power piston has increased, and there is a added volume of gas between it, top dead center now, and the displacer. I would have liked for this to have gone all the way up to here, top dead center, but it just was not handy. It would have had to greatly modify this. I didn't want to do that. I want this to be reversible. If this didn't work out, or if there's something I want to question later, I could just pop this off and put this back in. This is just RTV'd, the red silicone rubber, the heat enduring stuff. They really don't need that. I could have used anything here, but I had it handy, so that's what I used. And it's a pretty good mechanical adhesive. It seals well, and it's quite resistant to heat. And so this is just glued on there. As I said, this was a mechanical damper. And the stroke, the length of the stroke has not been changed for this. Another difference is with this has, because it's a glass graphite interface, is very reliably lubricated. The tolerances between the spacing between the outer diameter of that piston and the inside diameter of this glass piece can be held to very, very close tolerances. And boy howdy, it's a lot better than I got here. So this thing seals. Now, this cylinder was held in this block here with a fastener, this nylon threaded screw that goes in there. And that held this in place, just to keep it from moving, falling out. Because of where this hole is, if I take this out, it allows it to move freely, and that's because, and you might be able to hear it whistling, because this is threaded. It's a 1/4-20 threads, bye-bye. It actually, air going in and out through this hole because of this piston whistles. With this in there, again, this was sealed all the way up to here. This just held this in place. There was enough blow-by, meaning enough gases could get around this piston and this cylinder, so that you give this thing a spin and it would do just like it's doing now. There was enough leakage of air around this to allow the thing to move fairly freely. Well, I want to reduce that, and using this certainly does. I'm going to give this a spin, right? Choot, choot, choot. Now, I'll give it a spin and then block this hole, which right now is acting as a vent between both the power piston and the displacer, power cylinder and the displacer cylinder. I'll block that off and it'll stop it. In addition, see what these flexible couplings are doing. If I force it, they'll knuckle. Like that. See how that's doing? Kind of a safety feature. If I had hard couplings in here, that might be a disaster. But with this, it just kind of, okay, we got it covered. There are caveats to these sorts of couplings, but for this application, I think they work pretty well. So I'm going to put this nylon screw in there just to block off that air way. Oh, and also that hole also provided an interesting, it's a port through which you could measure the pressures in here. And I did notice, I'm not going to set it up again here, but I did notice a net positive pressure over time running this thing. I'm not sure that's the best idea. Well, it does make the gas in the displacer and so forth more dense, but it also means that this is biased to push this way with a high pressure in here. But I'm not sure quite what the particular disadvantages of that might be. And it may be a trade-off. It may not make any difference at all. So anyway, moving right along, I'm going to get to the interesting part. I did a previous run. I've run this thing probably, I got about, since I've changed this, maybe an hour of runtime on it, and I kind of break it in, learn about it. So I measured the RPM using a strobe tech. This guy, they don't play well with these digital cameras, so it does not do well to try to video that. But what I got out of this when the last run was 525 RPM, which is pretty close to what it was with this cylinder. But very noticeable differences in the torque on it. Now I don't have a torque gauge on this. I'm using the well-calibrated fingertips to squeeze on the end of this shaft. And with this cylinder and piston, it didn't have a lot of torque. It had the RPM, but it didn't have a lot of pulling power. You try to drive anything with it, it would kind of bog down to chunk, 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 chunk. This, not so much. I think partly because it's a larger diameter cylinder and piston, and also because it seals better here. Not sure, but I tell you, it is a noticeably different amount of torque. And I was playing around with it some. I was sticking motors on it, little DC permanent magnet motors, directly on the shaft through a flexible coupling, like this stuff. And they get useful energy out of it, but the RPM wasn't quite high enough. And those didn't bog this down at all. So what I need to do is put a larger pulley on this shaft and then try to drive some DC motors acting as generators, just to see what we can get out of it, just for grins and the giggles. So anyway, enough of that. About 30 milliliters denatured alcohol. I dumped it in the stove. I'll fire it up and let it run. And it knocks. Well, knocks not the right word. It rocks a little bit because I did not readjust this counterweight to account for the difference in weight of this piston and connection. It's pretty close enough that I don't think you need to worry about it for now. I may get to it later. Well, that's why they're taped on and not bolted in, because this needs to be easily changeable. Now, let's get some fire on it. And I'll position that more or less centered. Another difference with this, oh yeah, I could probably add some coolant, a little water. Cool that cotton. It takes a bit more heat to get her going. With the copper cylinder and aluminum piston, and the blow-by made it easier. It started sooner with less temperature differential here. This takes a little bit more heat to get her going, but once it gets going, oh boy, it's just about. That's not quite. I know you cannot see it. It's not quite jetting yet, but looks like there she goes. Now I'll shut up and just let her. You can hear her running, not me blather on. Put strobe tack on it a sec. Sorry if it causes weirdness. Hard to see with the bright lights, but it's there. I'm getting 522 RPM right now. It's shaking a little bit, a little out of balance. And then I'm going to pinch the shaft over here. It's pulling. I've noticed that when you do that, things change enough that the torque increases, and if you let it go, it ramps up above the normal idle RPM to cause this to get hotter. I've seen other engines with these glass and graphite assemblies as the power piston, and I've had this for years, and I thought, that would be a very good idea, and somebody else was doing it, saying, hey, I got to try that. And sure enough, they do work quite well. My cooler's getting a little steamy here, so I've got some coolant. That out of fuel. Yeah, just let it run out. It's almost done. This block gets a little warmer with this system. More hot gases. Air. Yeah. Fuel's going down. Almost out. And out it goes. Okay, so then, if you can use these, do. And they work better than anything else I could come up with in my garage. Nice and steamy. And drape that over there just to cool everything off real nice. And the other thing too, you know, these can run in either direction. It's just a matter of the phasing that you do with the power piston versus the displacer. Typically they recommend 90 degrees out of phase one way or the other, depending on which direction you want to spin. I find it to be better a little bit different than 90. Your mileage may vary, but play with it. Make it so that you can adjust it, as this sort of arrangement does. Hey, I guess that's all I got. Yeah, if anything else occurs to me or some other change to this happens, I reckon I'll make that maybe part 3. See ya.